Some stories stay with you because they remind you of something true. This is one of those stories. It takes place in Arizona territory. Back in 1883, when a man's word meant everything, and a woman's worth was measured by hands that could work. But sometimes, the ones who seem broken carry the strongest hearts. I heard this tale years ago, from an old rancher who swore every word was gospel. Whether or not you believe it, I reckon you'll remember it, because it speaks to something we all understand, that loneliness recognizes loneliness. And sometimes, rescue comes from the most unexpected places. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip across the crowd. "Come on now, gentlemen, she can't walk, but she's got all her teeth." Laughter rippled through the square. Flies circled the molasses jar by the general store window. August heat pressed down on every shoulder. It wasn't legal. Not exactly auctioning a woman's indenture to settle her dead father's debts, but in small towns, far from judges, plenty of things happened that shouldn't have, and nobody was asking questions. Grace Holloway sat rigid in the wicker wheelchair, knuckles white against the armrests. They had sold her father's horses first, then the plow, then the cook stove. Now they were bidding on her services, 5 years of labor, to whoever would take her. No one raised a hand. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his neck. $5 for 5 years, anyone? More snickering. A woman whispered behind her fan. From the back wall, boots hit the wooden floor, heavy, deliberate. Caleb Stone walked forward, hat in hand. $50, he said. The room went silent. She's mine now. If this story stirs something familiar in your heart, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. As the old folks used to say, a kind word shared is never wasted. The buckboard creaked as Caleb lifted her. His hands were rough beneath her arms, calloused and sure, and she weighed nothing against the broadness of his chest. He set her on the wooden seat like she was made of something that could break. She was not made of something that could break, not anymore. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, said nothing. The wagon lurched forward. Dust rose behind the wheels in lazy spirals. Cicadas screamed from the mesquite trees lining the road. Their sound swelling and fading like a fever, the canvas shade he had rigged above the seat blocked some of the sun, but sweat still gathered at her temples, trickled down the back of her neck into the collar of her faded calico dress. 1 mile passed, then 2. His jaw stayed set. His eyes stayed forward. The leather reins wrapped around his knuckles, weathered and scarred. Grace watched his hands. A man's hands told you everything. These had worked. These had bled. These had built something. But they had also been alone for a very long time. "You didn't buy my indenture out of pity." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Not a question. He didn't turn his head. "No, ma'am." "Then why?" The wagon wheels crunched over a patch of dry rock. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow sliding across the reeded earth. "Reckon I don't rightly know yet," he said. The road climbed, the mesquite thinned, and then the wagon crested a ridge, and Stone Ranch spread out below them, a small adobe house with wooden shutters, a weathered barn listing slightly to the east, brown hills dotted with cattle in the distance. Grace's breath caught, not because it was beautiful, because it was the loneliest place she had ever seen. No curtains in the windows, no flowers by the door, no clothesline, no rocking chair on the porch, except just one facing west toward nothing. He had been here alone, for years. She turned to look at him. His knuckles had gone white on the reins. "How long?" she asked. He didn't answer. He clicked his tongue, and the horse started down the hill toward the house. But she had seen his throat move, swallowing something he couldn't say. And she wondered what had happened here that left a man unable to speak of it. The beans were burnt. Grace could smell it the moment he set the tin plate in front of her, that acrid edge beneath the salt. The slight bitterness that clung to the back of the tongue. The biscuits beside them were hard enough to crack teeth. She picked one up. It did not yield. Caleb sat across from her at the small wooden table, his own plate untouched. The tallow candle between them threw unsteady shadows across his face. Outside, the last light had drained from the sky, leaving only the deep blue of early night pressing against the windows. Windows with no curtains. She bit into the biscuit, chewed, swallowed. He watched her. "Ain't fit to eat," he said. "I know it." She took another bite. "I've eaten worse." His fork scraped against his plate. He hadn't lifted it. "My father drank our meals most months," she said. "Toward the end, I learned to make soup from potato peels and hope. This is better than hope." Something moved behind his eyes. Not pity, she knew pity. And this was not it. Recognition. Maybe. The understanding that passed between two people who had both learned to survive on less than they deserved. He picked up his fork, ate. They finished the meal in silence. He cleared the plates. She sat in the wheelchair he had positioned by the table, listening to the sounds of him moving through the small kitchen water from the hand pump, the clatter of tin in the wash basin, the scrape of his boots on the packed earth floor. When he returned, he lifted her without asking and carried her to the narrow bed in the corner of the main room. A quilt lay folded at the foot. Faded, worn, but clean. He set her down gently, then stepped back. "I'll take the porch," he said. She nodded. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Grace lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling beams above her. Adobe walls, hand-hewn timber, the smell of dust and old wood and something else emptiness. The particular smell of a house where no one had laughed in a very long time. She heard his boots on the porch boards, pacing, back and forth, back and forth. She closed her eyes. The tears came without permission. She pressed her fist against her mouth to hold in the sound, her body shaking beneath the quilt. The humiliation of the auction, the faces laughing, the auctioneer's voice cracking jokes about her teeth like she was livestock, and this stranger who had paid $50 for her indenture and then fed her burnt beans and given her his bed. She did not understand him. She was not sure she wanted to. Outside, the pacing stopped. Silence. Then it resumed. He had heard her. She knew it, but he did not come inside. Morning light fell through the curtainless windows in hard yellow slants. Grace woke to the smell of coffee burnt again, but coffee and the sound of the hand pump working outside. She pulled herself upright. Her arms had grown strong over the years of compensating for legs that did not work. She could lift her own weight, shift herself from bed to chair if the chair was close enough. He had left it within reach. A small thing, but she noticed. She maneuvered herself into the wheelchair and rolled toward the main room. The house was smaller than it had looked from the ridge, one large room that served as kitchen and sitting area. A smaller room behind a curtain that must be his, and what appeared to be a storage room beyond. And there, against the far wall, beneath a window coated with dust, a roll-top desk, papers spilled from its pigeonholes, envelopes, some opened. Most not lay scattered across its surface. A leather-bound ledger sat closed beneath a layer of grime, its brass clasp dull with neglect. Grace wheeled closer. Bills, tax notices, receipts, correspondence from banks and cattle buyers and feed suppliers, months of it, maybe years, all of it untouched. The front door opened. Caleb stepped in, a bucket of water in each hand. He stopped when he saw where she was. "That ain't nothing you need to worry about," he said. She turned to face him. "When did you last open this ledger?" His jaw tightened. He set the buckets down by the stove. "Don't recall. These bills, some of them are 6 months old. I know what they are. Do you know what they say?" He crossed the room in 3 strides, his boots heavy on the floor. For a moment, she thought he might push her away from the desk, might tell her to mind her own business, might remind her that she was here on his contract and had no right to question anything. But he stopped. His hands hung at his sides, opening and closing. "I don't need help," he said. "Everyone needs help. Not from—" He caught himself. "From a woman who can't walk." The words hung between them. His face darkened, not with anger. She realized, but with shame. "I didn't mean it like that," he said, quieter now. "I know." She turned back to the desk, ran her finger through the dust on the ledger cover. "I can't walk. Mr. Stone, I can't help you mend fences, or rope cattle, or carry water from the well, but I can read, I can write, and I can count." She looked at him over her shoulder. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She taught me numbers and letters before I could tie my own shoes. Let me help. This is something I can do." He stood there for a long moment. The candle on the table had burned down to a stub overnight. Morning light caught the smoke stains on the ceiling above it. Outside, a horse nickered in the corral. Then he moved. He crossed to the desk, pulled a rag from his back pocket, and began wiping the dust from the ledger's surface. His movements were careful, almost tender, the way a man handles something he has been avoiding for a long time. When the cover was clean, he undid the brass clasp and opened it. "It was my wife's," he said. "She kept the books, before." Grace's hand hovered over the yellowed pages, neat columns of numbers in a feminine script. Entries that stopped abruptly. Mid-page. 3 years ago. What happened to her? Caleb pulled a chair from the corner, set it beside the desk, sat down heavily, his elbows on his knees. "She left," Hisyon said. "After our boy died, she couldn't stay, and I couldn't leave." Grace looked at the last entry in the ledger. March 1880. 3 years of silence on the page. 3 years of a man trying to hold a ranch together alone, unable to face the books his dead son's mother had kept. She picked up the steel nib pen from the inkwell. It was dry. The ink had long since crusted over. "Do you have fresh ink?" she asked. He looked at her, and for the first time since the auction, something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but something close, something like the first crack of dawn after a night that seemed like it would never end. "Reckon I might," he said. He rose to find it, and as Grace waited, her fingers resting on the ledger's open page, she noticed something tucked between the last entries, a small photograph. Face down, hidden. She did not turn it over, not yet. 6 weeks. 42 days of ink-stained fingers and columns of numbers and the slow, painstaking work of bringing order to chaos. Grace sat at the roll-top desk, the morning light falling across the open ledger in front of her. The smell of dried ink hung in the air, that particular mustiness of old paper and accounting books. left too long untouched. She had filled 14 pages already, transferring the scattered records into proper entries, cross-referencing receipts with bills of sale, rebuilding 3 years of neglected bookkeeping, one line at a time. Her back ached from hunching over the desk. Her eyes burned from squinting at faded handwriting in lamplight. She had worked past midnight more times than she could count, forgetting meals, forgetting sleep, forgetting everything except the numbers. The numbers made sense. The numbers followed rules. The numbers did not look at her with pity or laugh behind their hands. Behind her, boots crossed the floor, the familiar weight of Caleb's step. He set a tin cup of coffee on the desk beside her elbow. Steam curled up from its surface. She did not look up from the column she was totaling. "You ain't eaten since yesterday noon," he said. "I ate the biscuit you left." "Half a biscuit." She made a notation in the margin. "I'll eat when I finish this section." He did not leave. She heard him shift his weight, the creak of leather, the small sounds of a man who wanted to say something but could not find the words. This had become their rhythm over the past weeks, him bringing coffee, bringing food, bringing small things he thought she might need, her accepting without comment, continuing her work. Yesterday, he had brought wild flowers, purple sage and yellow brittlebush, arranged in a rusted tomato can, placed on the corner of the desk without explanation. She had not mentioned them, neither had he. They were still there now, the petals beginning to curl at the edges. "Emmett's comin' today," Caleb said. "Bringin' supplies from town." Grace looked up. Emmett. Ranch hand, known him 20 years. He's been running errands while He stopped. Started again. "While things have been difficult," she turned back to the ledger. "I'll need to speak with him." "About what?" "The cattle counts from last spring. The numbers in these receipts don't match what's recorded in the brand registry." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Emmett's honest. Whatever's wrong, it ain't him." "I didn't say it was." She heard him exhale. His boots retreated across the floor, and the front door opened and closed. Through the window, she watched him walk toward the corral, his shoulders tight beneath his worn cotton shirt. He did not like her questions, but he had stopped trying to prevent them. That, she supposed, was progress. Emmett arrived at midday, his wagon rattling up the dirt track with a load of flour sacks and feed bags piled in the back. He was older than Grace had expected, 60 at least, with a face like cracked leather and a white mustache stained yellow at the corners from tobacco. He swung down from the wagon seat with the ease of a man who had spent his whole life climbing on and off horses. He stopped short when he saw her on the porch. "Well," he said. "That's new?" Caleb came around the corner of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Emmett, this is Miss Holloway." Emmett's eyes moved from Grace to Caleb and back again. Something flickered across his face, surprise. Certainly, but something else too, something that looked almost like hope. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. "Mr. Emmett." Grace wheeled herself to the edge of the porch. Caleb had built a ramp the second week, rough planks hammered together without comment, placed by the steps one morning before she woke. "I've been reviewing the ranch accounts. I have some questions about the spring cattle drive." Emmett blinked. He looked at Caleb. Caleb shrugged. "She's been going through the books." "The books?" Emmett's mustache twitched. "Nobody's touched them books in 3 years." "I'm touching them now," Grace said. "The receipts from the Cobb Cattle Company you handled the delivery last April. Correct, 50 head. Contracted for sale." Emmett scratched the back of his neck. "Sounds about right." How many did you actually deliver? 50. Counted them myself. Grace pulled a folded paper from the pocket of her dress. She had taken to keeping the most troubling documents close, where she could reference them quickly. This receipt is signed by Harlan Cobb's foreman. It records only 30 head received. Emmett's face darkened. That ain't right. I watched them boys count. 50 head went into that pen. Then why does the receipt say 30? Silence. Emmett looked at Caleb. Caleb's jaw had tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble on his cheek. I don't know, ma'am, Emmett said slowly, but I know what I saw. Grace folded the paper and returned it to her pocket. I believe you, Mr. Emmett, which means someone at Cobb's operation is lying. She turned her wheelchair and rolled back toward the door. The two men watched her go. She could feel their eyes on her back, the weight of their silence. Mr. Stone, Emmett said, quiet enough that he probably thought she could not hear. I been working for you 12 years. Ain't never seen nobody go through them books like that woman does. Miss Holloway. What's that? Her name, Grace Holloway, not that woman. A pause. Then Emmett chuckled, low and knowing. Sure thing, boss. Sure thing. Grace did not look back, but she tucked that sound away somewhere safe. Alongside the wildflowers he had not explained, night fell slowly over the ranch, the sky fading from orange to purple to the deep black of desert darkness. Grace sat at the desk, the coal oil lamp casting a pool of yellow light across the scattered papers before her. Caleb had gone to bed an hour ago, retreating to his small room behind the curtain after their silent supper of beans and cornbread. Better beans this time. She had taught him to soak them longer, to keep the heat low, to stir more often. Small improvements, but improvements nonetheless. The coffee in her tin cup had gone cold. She did not notice. Her finger traced down the column of numbers, moving from one entry to the next. April's cattle sale, May's feed purchase, June's equipment repair. The pattern was emerging now, faint but unmistakable, like tracks in dust that had been half covered by wind. She pulled another receipt from the pile. July 1882. Cobb Cattle Company, 40 head contracted. The receipt from Cobb's foreman recorded 25 delivered. Her fingers stopped. Tapped the paper twice. She reached for the next receipt. September 1882. 60 head contracted, 42 recorded. And the next. November 1882. 30 head contracted, 18 recorded. The numbers swam before her eyes. She sat back in the wheelchair, her hands gripping the armrests. Every sale to Harlan Cobb's company for the past 2 years showed the same discrepancy. Cattle leaving Stone Ranch. Fewer cattle arriving at Cobb's pens, the difference always between 15 and 20 head vanishing somewhere between here and there. Not vanishing. She corrected herself. Stolen. Someone was stealing Caleb's cattle and doctoring the receipts to hide it. Someone with access to the counting pens. The paperwork. The foreman's signature. Someone at Cobb's company. Or someone higher. Grace pulled the lamp closer. The light caught the ink on the receipts. The careful penmanship that matched from document to document. Not multiple hands, one hand, one person, signing for every short delivery, every falsified count. She squinted at the signature. The letters were cramped, hurried, but legible. H. Cobb, not the foreman, Harlan Cobb himself. The wealthiest cattle buyer in the territory had been systematically stealing from Caleb Stone for at least 2 years. Probably longer. She had not yet gone through the records from 1880 and 1881. The amounts were small enough that a rancher struggling to keep his head above water might not notice, especially one who had stopped looking at his books entirely after his wife left and his son died. But Grace noticed. She reached for her pen. Her hand was steady as she began to write, listing the discrepancies in a neat column, calculating the total loss, 312 head of cattle over 23 months. At current prices, that was nearly $4,000, enough to pay off the back taxes on the ranch, enough to repair the barn, enough to buy new equipment, hire more hands, turn this struggling operation into something sustainable, enough to destroy a man who thought no one would ever look. Grace set down her pen. The lamp flame guttered in a draft from the window, and shadows jumped across the walls. She would have to tell Caleb, in the morning, when the light was good and his mind was clear. But even as she thought it, another question formed darker, more troubling. If Harlan Cobb had been stealing this much for this long, what would he do when he found out someone was finally keeping count? Sunday. The word itself felt strange to Grace. Like a garment she had not worn in years, her father had not observed Sundays. Neither had the boarding house where she had spent the months after his death, scrubbing floors until the fever came and took her legs. But Caleb Stone observed Sundays. No work, no ledgers, no talk of cattle or receipts or the numbers that had kept her awake most of the night. She had told him about Cobb at breakfast, laid the receipts on the table between the coffee cups, pointed to the discrepancies, explained what the pattern meant. He had listened without interrupting, his face growing still in that way she had come to recognize the stillness of a man holding something back, pressing it down where it could not escape. When she finished, he had risen from the table and walked outside. That was 3 hours ago. Now the afternoon light slanted golden across the porch, and Grace sat in her wheelchair watching the hills turn amber and walked in the fading sun. The porch swing beside her new, rough-hewn, installed 2 days ago without comment, creaked gently in the breeze. He had built it wide enough for 2 people, though he had not said why. The front door opened behind her, his boots on the boards, the scrape of the chair he pulled up beside her. "Lemonade," he said, setting a glass in her hand. The pressed glass was cool against her palm. She lifted it to her lips. The tartness hit her tongue first. Then the sweetness, real sugar. Not sorghum. Precious. Expensive. He had used it anyway. "Thank you," she said. He settled into the porch swing. It groaned under his weight. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and distant sage, and somewhere in the pasture below, the first crickets began to chirp. $4,000, he said finally. "That's what you figured. Give or take. I haven't finished going through 80 and 81 yet." He nodded slowly. His hands rested on his knees, scarred and weathered, the knuckles still bearing traces of the work he had done that morning, despite his own rule about Sundays. Fixing the corral fence, mending the barn door hinge, staying busy, staying away from her. "I should have seen it," he said. "You had other things on your mind." "That ain't an excuse." "No, but it's a reason." He turned his head toward her. The light caught the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through the hair at his temples. He was not old 40, perhaps, or close to it, but he wore his years heavily, the way men did when those years had cost them something they could not get back. "Why do you care?" he asked. Grace set her glass on the porch rail. "I told you, this is something I can do." "That ain't what I mean." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, studying her face. You could have just kept quiet. Let things be. You ain't got no stake in this ranch or what happens to it. Don't I? The question hung between them. The crickets grew louder. The sun touched the top of the distant mesa, spreading orange and pink across the sky. I've been a burden my whole life, Grace said. The words came without planning, rising from somewhere she had kept locked for a very long time. My mother died when I was 12, scarlet fever. My father blamed me not out loud, but I saw it in his eyes every time he looked at me. He drank to forget her. I reminded him. Caleb was silent, listening. When the fever took my legs, I thought... She stopped, swallowed. I thought maybe it was fittin'. Punishment for being the one who lived when she didn't. For being a weight around his neck all those years. That ain't... Let me finish. Her voice was steady, but her hands had begun to tremble in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs. When he died and left nothing but debt, they put me on that auction block like a broken plow, something to be sold off and forgotten. And I thought, this is it. This is what I'm worth. This is all I'll ever be. The last sliver of sun slipped below the mesa. Purple twilight crept across the porch, softening the edges of everything. Then you stood up, she said, and you didn't look at me like I was broken. You looked at me like... She could not finish the sentence. She did not know how. Caleb's hand moved. Rough fingers brushed against hers on the armrest of her chair. He did not take her hand, did not pull away, just rested there, his skin against hers, the warmth of him seeping through. My boy was 4 when he died, he said. His voice was low, rough-edged, like something dragged over gravel. Scarlet fever, same as your ma. Took him in 3 days. His mother, Tara, she couldn't stay after. Said every corner of this house had his ghost in it. Said I didn't grieve right. Didn't cry enough. Didn't feel enough. Did you feel? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I felt so much I thought it would kill me, but I couldn't let it out. Couldn't find the words. She needed me to fall apart, and I just kept working, kept moving, kept breathing. Grace turned her hand over. His fingers slid between hers. She left in the spring, he continued. Took a stage to California. I got a letter 6 months later saying she'd remarried. A banker in San Francisco. Someone who could talk about his feelings. His thumb traced a circle on the back of her hand. I stopped reading after that. Stopped doing much of anything, except what had to be done to keep the cattle alive and the land from falling apart. 3 years. 3 years, he nodded. And then you. The words sat between them, small and enormous at the same time. I didn't buy your indenture out of pity, he said. And I didn't do it because I needed someone to cook or clean or keep my books. I did it because when I looked across that auction hall and saw you sitting there, not crying, not begging, just looking straight ahead like you dared the whole world to break you, I thought. There's someone who knows what it feels like, to be alone in a room full of people, to be invisible even when everyone's staring. Grace's throat tightened. She could not speak. This house ain't felt like home in years, Caleb said. His voice dropped, went soft. Not till you. The crickets sang. Fireflies rose from the pasture below, their lights winking gold against the gathering dark. His hand stayed in hers, warm and solid and real. She did not know how long they sat there, long enough for the stars to emerge, scattered across the black velvet sky. long enough for the night sounds to swell around them, the horses shifting in the corral. The distant howl of a coyote, the creak of the porch swing in the evening breeze. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What do we do about Cobb?" Caleb's hand tightened on hers. "Tomorrow. We'll figure it out tomorrow. He won't stop. Men like him don't stop until someone makes them. I know. He has money, power. The bank listens to him. Half the ranchers in this territory owe him something. I know." She turned to look at him. In the darkness, she could barely make out his features, but she could feel the tension in his grip, the coiled readiness in his body. "I have a plan," she said, "but you ain't gonna like it." "Tell me anyway." She drew a breath. The night air was cool now, carrying the first hints of autumn. "The county commissioner meeting is in 2 weeks. Every rancher in the territory will be there. If Cobb cheated you, he cheated others. We find them. We gather the evidence, and we expose him in front of everyone." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "That's a mighty big gamble," he said finally. "If it don't work, he'll come after us with everything he's got. Yes, could lose the ranch, could lose everything. Yes." His hand shifted in hers, not pulling away, holding tighter. "Then I reckon we better not lose." The fireflies drifted upward, their lights fading against the stars, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the porch, Grace heard the sound of hooves on the road, a rider approaching, moving fast, the drumbeat of urgency in every stride. The rider was not Cobb. It was a boy, 14, maybe 15, on a lathered mare, his face pale in the moonlight. He pulled up short at the porch steps, the horse blowing hard, foam flecking its bit. "Mr. Stone?" The boy's voice cracked. "Message from town. Mr. Cobb says he's coming tomorrow. Wants to discuss business." Caleb's hand had not left Grace's. She felt his fingers tighten. "What kind of business?" "Didn't say, sir. Just said to expect him mid-morning." The boy shifted in his saddle, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. "He gave me $1 to ride out at dawn. Said it was urgent." "I'll bet he did." Caleb released Grace's hand and stepped to the edge of the porch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a coin, and flipped it to the boy. "Get yourself something to eat in town, and tell Cobb I'll be here." The boy caught the coin, nodded once, and wheeled his horse back down the road. The hoofbeats faded into the darkness, leaving only the crickets and the distant coyote and the sound of Grace's own heartbeat in her ears. "He knows," she said. "Maybe he knows." Caleb, why else would he come now, after 3 years of taking what he wanted, without a word? Caleb turned to face her. In the starlight, his expression was unreadable. "Then we'll be ready for him." Mid-morning came with the sound of wheels on gravel. Grace positioned herself at the desk, the ledger open before her, the damning receipts arranged in careful order beneath a paperweight. Through the window, she watched the black surrey approach, polished to a shine that seemed almost obscene against the dusty browns of the ranch, its leather top throwing sharp shadows across the yard. The smell reached her before the vehicle stopped. Cologne, something French and expensive, cutting through the familiar scents of horse and hay and sun-baked earth. It did not belong here. Nothing about what was coming belonged here. The horses that pulled the surrey were matched bays, their coats gleaming with health and money. Everything about the vehicle screamed wealth. Eastern wealth. The kind that did not belong here but had come anyway. Because there was profit to be extracted from men who worked the land with their hands. Harlan Cobb stepped down from the surrey with the ease of a man accustomed to being watched. He was younger than Grace had expected, 50. perhaps, with silver threading through dark hair slicked back from a high forehead. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored close to his body, the gold chain of a pocket watch glinting at his vest. In his right hand, he carried a walking stick with a silver head shaped like a wolf. She noted that detail, filed it away. Caleb met him at the edge of the porch. He did not offer his hand. "Mr. Stone." Cobb's voice was smooth, cultured, with the faint trace of an accent that might have been Boston or might have been affectation. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Didn't have much choice. Did I? Oh, there's always a choice." Cobb smiled. His teeth were very white. "That's what I'm here to discuss. Actually, choices." Grace watched through the window as Caleb led Cobb to the porch chairs, the same chairs where she and Caleb had sat the night before, hands intertwined, planning their defense. Now Cobb settled into the porch swing like he owned it, crossing one leg over the other, the silver wolf's head of his cane resting against his knee. "I'll come straight to the point," Cobb said. "The cattle market is difficult right now. Drought conditions, transportation costs. You know how it is. I know how it is. Word around town is that Stone Ranch is struggling. Back taxes unpaid. Equipment failing. A man trying to run a 1,000-acre operation alone." Cobb's eyes drifted to the window where Grace met. She did not flinch. Or perhaps not entirely alone anymore. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Get to the point. Cobb, the point is simple. I want to help." Cobb reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. "I'm prepared to offer you a fair price for the ranch, enough to clear your debts, settle your accounts, and start fresh somewhere else. California, perhaps. I hear the climate is agreeable." He held out the paper. Caleb did not take it. "This land belonged to my father," Caleb said, "and his father before him. It ain't for sale. Everything is for sale. Mr. Stone, it's only a question of price." "Not this." Cobb's smile did not waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. The pleasant mask remained. But Grace could see the predator beneath it, patient, calculating, utterly without mercy. She had seen that look before, on creditors circling her father's debts, on the auctioneer who had sold her indenture like livestock, on every man who had ever looked at her and seen not a person but a problem to be exploited. "That's unfortunate," Cobb said. He tucked the document back into his jacket. "Because I've been speaking with the Territorial Bank, it seems there are some irregularities in your accounts, payments missed, interest accruing, the sort of thing that can lead to very unpleasant consequences if not addressed." Caleb's hands had curled into fists at his sides. "What kind of consequences?" "Foreclosure. Mr. Stone, the bank is prepared to call in your loans, all of them. Unless, of course, you find a way to settle your debts quickly." Cobb spread his hands. The gesture of a man offering salvation. "My offer would accomplish that quite neatly." "Your offer. Generous. Given the circumstances." Caleb stepped closer to Cobb. His shadow fell across the older man's polished shoes. "Let me tell you something about vultures, Mr. Cobb. They circle dying animals, waiting for the end. But they got one problem." His voice dropped low. "Dangerous. Sometimes the animal ain't as dead as they think." Cobb rose from the porch swing. His smile had hardened into something cold. "I admire your spirit, Mr. Stone. Truly. But spirit doesn't pay debts. You have 30 days to reconsider my offer. After that—" He shrugged, adjusting his cuffs. "Well, the bank will do what the bank must do." He walked to his surrey without looking back. The matched bays stamped their hooves as he climbed aboard. The wheels crunched over gravel as the vehicle turned and headed back down the road. Leaving only dust in its wake, Caleb stood on the porch, his shoulders rigid, watching until the surrey disappeared over the ridge. Grace wheeled herself to the door and pushed it open. "He's been cheating you," she said. "I can prove it, but we need more evidence, more than just your receipts." Caleb turned to face her. The anger in his eyes had not faded, but beneath it she saw something else now, something that looked almost like fear. "He mentioned the bank," he said. "How does he know about the bank? Because he controls it." Grace pulled a letter from the stack on her desk, one she had found buried in the pile of unopened correspondence, dated 6 months ago, bearing the letterhead of the Territorial Bank of Arizona. "I found correspondence mentioning shareholders. His name appears on documents from the bank itself. He's been positioning himself for years. Caleb, buying up debts, pressuring ranchers, forcing them to sell at pennies on the dollar. And I'm next. You were always next. He just needed you desperate enough to take his offer." Caleb crossed the porch to where she sat. He knelt beside her wheelchair, his face level with hers. "Can we beat him?" Grace met his eyes. She thought of the receipts on her desk, the pattern of theft stretching back years, the careful documentation of a crime committed in plain sight. She thought of Emmett's testimony and the other ranchers who must have similar stories, similar losses. She thought of the county commissioner meeting in 2 weeks and the room full of men who had been cheated just as Caleb had been cheated. "Yes," she said, "but not alone. We need others. Anyone else he's stolen from." "How do we find them?" "We start with Emmett. He knows every rancher in the territory. And then—" She stopped, through the window. She could see dust rising on the road again. Another rider approaching. Moving fast, the rider was Emmett. His face was gray, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss," he called out before he had even dismounted. "We got a problem. The bank just sent notice to Tom Holder. Foreclosure in 30 days. And I heard the same thing happened to the McAllister spread yesterday." Grace's blood ran cold. Cobb was not waiting. He was moving now, calling in debts across the territory, squeezing every rancher who might stand against him. By the time the commissioner meeting arrived, there might be no one left to testify. They were running out of time. The bank notice arrived 3 days later. Grace heard the rider approach at dawn hoofbeats on the hard-packed road, slowing at the gate. Stopping at the porch, she heard Caleb's boots cross the floor, heard the creak of the door, heard the low murmur of voices, then silence, the rider departing, the door closing with a sound like something final. Caleb did not come back inside. She waited. The coffee she had made properly this time, not burnt, grew cold in the pot. The morning light crept across the floor, illuminating the desk where her careful columns of evidence lay waiting. The receipts, the calculations, the proof of 3 years of systematic theft. None of it mattered now. She wheeled herself to the window. Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, his back to the house, a single sheet of heavy paper clutched in his hand. His shoulders were bowed in a way she had never seen before, not the weariness of a long day's work, but something deeper, something broken. She opened the door. He did not turn. 30 days, he said. His voice was flat, empty. Pay in full or forfeit the property. Signed by the Territorial Bank manager himself. Let me see it. He handed her the paper without looking at her. The letterhead was crisp, official, bearing the seal of the Territorial Bank of Arizona. The language was legal, precise, utterly without mercy. Default on payments, accumulated interest, immediate action required. The signature at the bottom was not Cobb's, but Grace recognized the hand that must have guided it. "He's accelerating," she said. "Moving faster than we expected." "It don't matter. Of course it matters. We have evidence. Evidence." Caleb laughed, but the sound was hollow, scraped raw. "Evidence against the man who owns the bank, who owns half the territory, who has judges and sheriffs and commissioners in his pocket." He finally turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Not anger, not determination, nothing. What good is evidence when there ain't nobody left to hear it? "There are other ranchers," Emmett said. Emmett said they're all getting the same notices. Holder, McAllister, the Dawson brothers out past the mesa. Every man who might have stood with us is fighting for his own survival now. His hands hung at his sides, limp, defeated. Cobb knew what we were planning. He knew, and he moved first. We never had a chance. Grace gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. "We still have 2 weeks until the commissioner meeting. 2 weeks." He shook his head slowly. "In 2 weeks, there won't be any ranches left to save. There won't be any witnesses left to testify. There won't be anything but Cobb and his money and all this land that used to belong to honest men." He walked past her, into the house. She heard him moving through the main room, heard the clink of glass, heard liquid pouring. When she wheeled herself inside, she found him slumped in the chair by the cold fireplace, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, dusty, unopened until now, pulled from some hidden place she had not known existed. He took a long swallow. "Caleb," another swallow. His throat worked. His eyes stayed fixed on the empty hearth. "My father built this house," he said. "Cut the timbers himself, mixed the adobe with his own hands. Took him 3 years, 3 years of workin' dawn to dark, livin' in a tent, eatin' beans and hardtack, buildin' something that would last." He lifted the bottle again. "His father came here with nothing, drove cattle up from Texas, lost half the herd to Indians and weather, buried his wife along the trail, started over anyway, because that's what you did. You got knocked down. You got back up. You kept going." The whiskey sloshed in the bottle, half gone already. "And now it ends with me. The son who couldn't hold on to what they built, the husband whose wife left because he didn't know how to grieve right, the father who—" His voice cracked. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. "The father who couldn't save his own boy." Grace's chest tightened. She wanted to go to him, to take his hand, to tell him it was not his fault. But the wheelchair trapped her 6 feet away, useless as always, and the words caught in her throat. "I'm tired," Caleb said. The bottle hung loose in his fingers now, nearly slipping. "I'm so tired of fightin', of losin', of watching everything I touch turn to dust. Then let me fight for you." He looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, wet with tears he had not shed. "You fight how you can't even—" He stopped, but the words hung in the air between them, sharp and cruel and true. "You can't even walk." Grace's face burned. Shame flooded through her, not at his words, but at her own helplessness, at the legs that did not work, at the body that had betrayed her, at the uselessness that had defined her entire life. No matter how hard she tried to prove otherwise, she had thought she could save him. She had thought her mind, her numbers, her careful evidence could make up for everything else she lacked. But what good was a mind when the world required legs? What good was intelligence when the battle demanded strength she did not have? The wheelchair felt like a cage, a prison. The metal and wicker that held her up now pressed down like chains. "You're right," she said. Her voice was quiet, hollow. "I can't walk. I can't ride to the other ranches and rally support. I can't stand before the commissioner and demand justice. I can't do anything except sit here and watch while Cobb takes everything." Caleb stared at her. The bottle slipped from his fingers and thudded against the floor. "Grace." "No." She gripped the wheels of her chair, knuckles white. "You're right. I'm useless. I have always been useless. A burden on my father until he drank himself to death. A burden on the boarding house until they couldn't afford my medicine. A burden on this ranch." Her voice broke. She pressed her fist against her mouth, fighting the sob that wanted to escape. "A burden on you. That ain't what I meant. Isn't it?" She turned her chair away from him, facing the window where the morning light fell cold and gray across the floorboards. "I thought I could help. I thought if I worked hard enough, counted carefully enough, proved my worth enough times, it would matter. But it doesn't matter. None of it matters. Because when the fight comes, I'm still just a cripple in a chair, watching from the window while the world burns." Silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating. Grace heard him rise from his chair, heard his boots cross the floor unsteady now, the whiskey and the grief weighing on him, heard him stop behind her. "I shouldn't have said that. You said what was true." "No." His hand touched her shoulder, tentative, trembling. "I said what I was afraid of. Not about you. About me." She did not turn. "I'm afraid," he said. "That's the truth of it. I ain't been afraid of anything in 20 years, not drought, not rustlers, not sickness, not death. But I'm afraid now, because for the first time since Sarah left, I got something to lose." His hand moved from her shoulder to her hair, his fingers, rough and calloused, brushed against her cheek. "You," he said. "I'm afraid of losing you." Grace closed her eyes. The tears she had been holding back spilled down her face, hot and silent. "You gave me a reason to come home," Caleb continued. His voice was raw, stripped of everything but truth. "You gave me a reason to fix the porch and cook better beans and wash the windows so the light could come in. You gave me a reason to live when I had stopped wanting to. Caleb, now let me give you one." And he knelt beside her chair, his face level with hers, his hand cupping her jaw. "Let me give you a reason to fight." She opened her eyes, met his gaze, saw the fear there and the shame, and beneath it all, something else, something fierce and desperate and unwilling to surrender. "How?" she whispered. "I don't know." He shook his head. "But we figure it out together. That's the only way I know how to do anything anymore." The coal oil lamp on the desk flickered, running low. The shadows in the room deepened. Grace reached up and covered his hand with hers. "The commissioner meeting," she said. "We can't wait for others to join us. We have to go ourselves, all of us. You, me, Emmett. And we have to bring proof so damning that even Cobb's bought men can't ignore it." What kind of proof? His own records. Grace's mind was working now, clicking through the problem like the gears of a clock. "The receipts I found show the theft from your side. But to prove a pattern, to prove he did this to everyone, we need his ledgers, his correspondence, the documents that show exactly how much he stole and from whom. Those records are in his office, in town, locked up tighter than the bank vault. Then we find another way in." Caleb stared at her. "You're talking about breaking into Harlan Cobb's private office." I'm talking about taking back what he stole. The lamp flickered again. The wick sputtered, coughed, and went out. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the faint gray light from the window. In the silence, Grace heard hoofbeats again, multiple riders this time. Coming up the road fast, Caleb rose to his feet. "Stay here." He crossed to the window, peered into the dim morning light. "Who is it?" Grace asked. He did not answer. His hand moved to the rifle mounted above the door, a weapon she had never seen him touch. "Caleb, who is it?" His voice came back tight, controlled, but beneath the control, she heard something that turned her blood to ice. "Cobb's men, 6 of them, and they ain't here to talk." The riders stopped at the edge of the yard. Grace could not see them from where she sat, but she could hear them, the creak of saddle leather, the snort of horses, the clink of metal against metal. 6 men, maybe more. The sound of boots hitting dirt as they dismounted. Caleb stood at the window, the rifle still in his hands but not raised. His knuckles were white around the stock. "Stone," a voice from outside, rough, impatient. "We ain't here to make trouble. Boss just wants to talk." "Your boss already talked. I gave him my answer. He wants a different answer." Caleb did not move. Grace wheeled herself closer to the window, positioning herself where she could see through the gap between the curtain frame and the glass. 6 men stood in the yard, their horses tied to the corral fence. They wore the rough clothing of ranch hands, dusty boots, sweat-stained hats, leather vests, but their eyes were hard, and 3 of them carried rifles. The man who had spoken was younger than the others, 25, maybe, lean and tall, with a scar running down the left side of his jaw. He stood at the front of the group, his hands resting on his belt, his posture coiled with tension. "We can do this easy," he said, "or we can do it hard. Your choice." "And if I choose neither?" The young man's jaw tightened. His hand moved toward his hip. Then he stopped. His eyes had found Grace through the window. She saw his gaze travel from her face to the wheelchair, taking in the useless legs, the thin wrists, the calico dress that had seen better days. Something shifted in his expression, not pity, exactly, but something close to it. He turned to face the men behind him. "There's a woman in there." "So what?" One of the older men spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Cobb said to send a message. He didn't say nothing about being polite. He didn't say nothing about no crippled woman neither." The young man's voice had changed, harder now, directed at his own crew. "My ma spent her last years in a chair just like that one. Couldn't walk after the apoplexy took her legs. Jake, that ain't our concern. Maybe it should be." Silence fell over the yard. The horses shifted restlessly. A crow called from somewhere in the distance, its cry harsh and mocking. Grace watched the young man's face. She saw the war happening behind his eyes, duty against conscience, fear against decency. He was not a good man. She could see that in the hardness of his features, the calluses on his gun hand, the way he carried himself like someone accustomed to violence. But he was not entirely bad either. Not yet. There was still something in him that recoiled at the thought of threatening a woman in a wheelchair. That something was fighting now, and winning. "I ain't doing this," Jake said. He turned his back on the house and walked to his horse. "Tell Cobb he wants to send a message. He can come deliver it himself." "Jake, you're the foreman. I said I ain't doing this." He swung into the saddle, his movements sharp with anger. "You boys want to stay. That's your business. But I'm done. He rode off without looking back. The dust from his horse's hooves hung in the air, golden in the morning light. The remaining men exchanged glances, without Jake to lead them. They were just hired hands, facing a man with a rifle, and nothing left to lose. One by one, their resolve crumbled. The oldest of them, the one who had spat tobacco, shook his head slowly. "This ain't over. Stone," he said. "Cobb's gonna hear about this. Let him hear." The men mounted their horses and rode away. Their hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the smell of dust and the slow settling of Grace's heartbeat. Caleb lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking. "That was close," he said. Grace did not answer. She was still watching the road where Jake had disappeared, thinking about the war she had seen in his eyes. The same war that raged in every human heart, the choice between what was easy and what was right. Today, right had won. But tomorrow was the county meeting, and tomorrow they would need more than one man's conscience to save them. Emmett returned at dusk, his horse lathered and his face drawn with exhaustion. "Rode to 6 spreads," he said, dismounting heavily. "Holder, McAllister, the Dawson brothers, Peterson, Old Man Grimes." He pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "They're scared, boss, real scared, but they're comin'. Every one of them got receipts that don't add up. Every one of them lost cattle to Cobb's countin' pens." Grace felt something loosen in her chest. "They'll testify. They'll be there, whether they got the spine to speak up." Emmett shrugged. "That's another question." It would have to be enough. The town hall smelled of sweat and tobacco, and the sour tang of unwashed bodies pressed too close together. Grace sat in her wheelchair near the back of the room, Caleb standing beside her, his hand resting on the chair's handle. The wooden benches were packed with ranchers, men with sun-weathered faces and calloused hands. Their wives and daughters clustered along the walls. The windows were grimy with dust, letting in slanted bars of afternoon sunlight that caught the particles floating in the air. At the front of the room, behind a podium bearing the county seal, Harlan Cobb presided like a king holding court. He wore the same charcoal suit, the same gold watch chain, the same expression of benevolent authority. His silver-headed cane leaned against the podium, the wolf's eyes glinting in the light. When he spoke, his voice filled the room with practiced ease. "And so, gentlemen, the bank has no choice but to protect its investments. These foreclosures are not punitive. They are necessary for the good of the territory." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not agreement. Grace could hear the anger beneath the surface. The resentment of men who had worked their whole lives only to be told their land was no longer theirs. But no one spoke up. No one challenged. They were afraid. She understood fear. She had lived with it her entire life, the fear of being a burden, of being useless, of being seen as less than human. But she had learned something in these past weeks at Stone Ranch. Fear was not the absence of courage. Fear was the fire that forged it. "Now," Caleb said quietly, "before he moves on." Grace nodded. Her hands gripped the wheels of her chair. Caleb pushed her forward. The crowd parted, heads turning, whispers spreading like wildfire through dry grass. She felt their eyes on her, curious, pitying, dismissive. The crippled woman from the auction, the one Caleb Stone had bought for $50. She ignored them all. When they reached the front of the room, Caleb stopped the chair facing Cobb. The older man's expression flickered surprise, then annoyance, then something colder. His hand moved to the silver wolf's head of his cane. "Mr. Stone," he said, "and Miss Holloway, is it I don't believe you're on the agenda?" "Make room," Caleb said. "I'm afraid that's not possible. We have a schedule to keep." "Make room." Caleb's voice was louder now, carrying to every corner of the hall. "This woman has something to say, and every man in this room needs to hear it." Cobb's smile did not waver, but his eyes had gone flat. Dangerous. "Very well," he said. "If you insist on making a spectacle." He stepped aside. Grace wheeled herself to the podium. The room fell silent, a heavy, waiting silence, thick with tension and the smell of too many bodies in too small a space. She looked out at the sea of faces, ranchers she did not know, men who had watched her, being sold like livestock, women who had whispered behind their fans. None of them had lifted a finger to help her then, but they were listening now. "My name is Grace Holloway," she said. Her voice was steady, clear. 8 weeks ago, I was auctioned off in this very town to settle my dead father's debts. Most of you were there. Most of you laughed. She paused. Let the words sink in. I don't blame you for that. I was nothing to you then, just a cripple in a chair. But I'm something now. I'm the woman who went through Caleb Stone's books. 3 years of records that nobody had touched since his wife left. And I found something. She reached into the satchel hanging from her armrest. Her fingers closed around the stack of papers. She had prepared receipts, ledgers, calculations, the evidence of Harlan Cobb's systematic theft. I found that Mr. Cobb has been stealing from every rancher in this territory. The silence shattered. Voices erupted, shouts of disbelief, demands for proof, cries of outrage. Cobb raised his hand for order, his face flushed with barely contained fury. "This is absurd," he said. "The ravings of a woman who cannot even walk." "I cannot walk," Grace said. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "But I can count. And your numbers, Mr. Cobb, are lies." She held up the first receipt, read aloud the discrepancy. 50 head contracted, 30 recorded, then the next, and the next, and the next, each one a damning piece of evidence, each one a nail in the coffin of Cobb's reputation. The room grew quieter with each revelation. The ranchers leaned forward, their skepticism giving way to recognition. They knew these numbers. They had seen these discrepancies in their own accounts, had wondered, had doubted, but had never thought to question the word of Harlan Cobb, until now. "She's lying," Cobb said. His voice had lost its smoothness. "These documents are forgeries. They bear your signature, Mr. Cobb." Grace held up the receipt so the room could see. Every one of them. Your hand, your ink, your theft. A long silence fell, then a sound from the back of the room, the scrape of a bench. A man rising slowly to his feet. Tom Holder, 70 years old, white-bearded, bent with age but unbowed. He held a piece of paper in his trembling hand. "She's right," he said. His voice cracked, but it carried. "He cheated me too. 12 head, last year. I got the receipt right here. Same numbers, same lies." Another man stood, then another, one by one. The ranchers of Dry Creek rose from their benches, their voices joining together. "He took 15 from me, 20 head, gone. I thought I miscounted, but—" Cobb's face had gone white. His hand gripped the wolf's head of his cane so tightly that his knuckles matched the silver. "This is a conspiracy," he snarled. "A plot against an honest businessman." Mr. Cobb, a new voice, calm and authoritative. Sheriff Burrell stepped forward from the side of the room, his badge catching the light. I think you'd better come with me. We'll need to sort this out down at the jail. You can't do this. I own this town. You don't own the law, Mr. Cobb. The sheriff's hand rested on his belt, near his holster, not threatening, just ready. I'm detaining you for investigation. The territorial judge will be here in 3 days. He can decide what happens next. 2 deputies moved forward. Cobb's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, finding none. The men who had supported him, the bankers, the lawyers, the politicians, had melted into the crowd, unwilling to be associated with a sinking ship. He was alone. The deputies took his arms, led him toward the door. His cane clattered to the floor. Forgotten, as he passed Grace's wheelchair, he stopped. The deputies paused. "This isn't over," he said. His voice was low, meant only for her. "You think you've won something. You've won nothing. The trial will come, and when it does, Grace said, I'll still be counting." She held his gaze, did not flinch, did not look away. Something broke behind his eyes, the last shred of his arrogance, crumbling under the weight of her certainty. The deputies pulled him away. The door closed behind them, and the room erupted. Men crowded around Grace's wheelchair, their hands reaching out to shake hers, their voices raised in gratitude and disbelief. Caleb stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his presence a warm anchor in the chaos. "You did it," he said. His voice was rough with emotion. "You actually did it." Grace looked up at him. Her hands were trembling now, the aftermath of adrenaline, the release of tension held too long. "We did it," she said. But even as she spoke, her eyes found the door where Cobb had been led away. His words echoed in her mind. This isn't over. She believed him. The crowd thinned slowly. Grace sat in her wheelchair near the town hall doors, watching the ranchers file out into the afternoon sunlight. Some paused to shake Caleb's hand. Others nodded to her, quick, awkward acknowledgments from men who did not know how to speak to a woman in a wheelchair but felt compelled to try. The smell of tobacco and sweat still hung in the air, mixing with the dust that drifted through the open doors. Her hands ached from gripping the armrests during her testimony. Her throat was dry from speaking, but something had shifted. She could feel it in the way people looked at her now. Not at the chair, at her. The woman who had sat before them and spoken truth to power. The woman who had done what none of them had dared to do. A shadow fell across her lap. She looked up. Widow Hannigan stood before her, clutching a worn handbag against her chest. She was 60 if she was a day, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that had seen too many hard years. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Miss Holloway." Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I was at the auction. When you... I remember." The older woman's chin trembled. "I didn't say nothing, didn't do nothing, just stood there with the rest of them, watching like it was entertainment." Grace waited. "We were wrong about you." The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I know that don't fix nothing, but... Mrs. Hannigan." Grace reached out and touched the woman's hand. The skin was papery, spotted with age, but warm. "It's done now." The widow's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed Grace's fingers once, then turned and hurried away, her shoulders shaking. Caleb appeared at Grace's side, His hand rested on the back of her chair, steady and familiar. Ready to go home. Home. The word caught in her chest, unexpected and sweet. Yes, she said. I am ready. The ride back to Stone Ranch took longer than usual. Caleb drove the buckboard slowly, letting the horses pick their way along the rutted road at their own pace. The afternoon sun slanted golden across the hills, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. The smell of sage drifted through the air, carried on a breeze that had lost the worst of the summer's heat. Grace sat beside him on the bench, her wheelchair secured in the back. She could have ridden in the bed, cushioned against the jolts, but he had lifted her up beside him without asking. She had not objected. They did not speak. There was nothing that needed to be said, not yet. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the creak of wheels and the clip of hooves and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. She watched his hands on the reins, scarred, calloused, strong, the same hands that had fed her burnt beans on her first night, the same hands that had built a ramp so she could reach the porch, the same hands that had held hers in the darkness while he spoke of his son. The wagon crested the ridge. Stone Ranch spread out below them, exactly as it had the first time she had seen it, small adobe house, weathered barn, brown hills dotted with cattle. But it did not look lonely anymore. The windows had curtains now she had sewn them from flour sacks during the quiet evenings, bleaching them white in the sun. The porch had 2 chairs instead of 1. The corral fence stood straight, repaired in the weeks since this all began. It looked like home. Caleb guided the wagon down the hill and pulled up beside the porch. He set the brake, wrapped the reins, and climbed down. When he came around to her side, he did not lift her immediately. He stood there, his hands on the wagon's edge, looking up at her. Grace, yes, I ain't good with words. You know that. I know. But there's something I got to say. Before we go inside, before anything else. She waited. The evening breeze stirred the loose strands of hair at her temples. Somewhere in the pasture, a cow lowed, long and low. When I bought your indenture at that auction, I didn't know why. I just knew I couldn't let them laugh at you anymore. Couldn't stand the way they looked at you. Like you was nothing. Like you didn't matter. He took a breath, let it out slowly. But it wasn't pity. I want you to understand that. It was something else. Something I didn't have words for then. And now. He reached up and took her hands, his fingers wrapped around hers, warm and rough. Now I know. His voice dropped, went soft. You gave me back my land. You gave me back my books and my accounts and my good name. But that ain't the important part. The important part is, you gave me a reason to come home at the end of the day. A reason to fix things. A reason to try. Grace's throat tightened. She could not speak. I want you to stay, he said, not because of the indenture. That paper don't mean nothing to me anymore. I want you to stay because of you. Just you. He lifted her from the wagon seat. Her arms went around his neck, holding on as he carried her to the porch, but instead of setting her in the wheelchair, he sat down on the top step, cradling her in his lap like she weighed nothing at all. The sun touched the edge of the mesa, spilling orange and gold across the sky. The first fireflies rose from the pasture below, their lights blinking against the gathering dusk. I stopped wanting to leave a long time ago, Grace said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I just didn't know how to say it. His hand moved to her face, Rough fingers traced the line of her cheek, her jaw, the curve of her ear. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing. Grace Holloway. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen before, not on him, not on anyone. Tender, certain, unafraid. Would you want to become Grace Stone? The question hung in the air between them. Simple, enormous, everything she had never dared to hope for. Offered in 8 words. She thought of the auction block, the laughter, the faces that had seen her as nothing more than a burden to be disposed of. She thought of the boarding house where she had scrubbed floors until her hands bled, the fever that had stolen her legs, the father who had drunk himself to death rather than face the daughter who reminded him of his dead wife. She thought of all the years she had spent believing she was worthless, useless, a weight around the neck of everyone who had ever tried to care for her. And then she thought of this man, this quiet, stubborn, wounded man who had paid $50 for a cripple he did not know, who had given her his bed and his books and his secrets, who had let her see his tears, who was asking her to share his name. "I thought you'd never ask," she said. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, not hesitant or polite. His mouth found hers with a hunger that had been building for weeks, and she answered it with equal force, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. The sun had disappeared below the mesa. The sky had turned to deep purple, scattered with the first stars. He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box, worn at the corners. "This was my mother's," he said. "She left it with me when she passed, said to give it to someone worthy." He opened the box. Inside, a gold band glinted in the fading light. Simple, unadorned, perfect. He slipped it onto her finger. It fit exactly. Grace looked down at the ring, then up at his face. The tears she had been holding back spilled over, running down her cheeks unchecked. "Welcome home, Grace Stone," he said. The trial came 3 weeks later. The territorial judge found Harlan Cobb guilty of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. His empire unraveled, his foremen scattered. The bank found new management, and the ranchers he had cheated received compensation from the sale of his assets. But that was later. Now, in the quiet of a September evening, the porch held 2 chairs. The rocking chair sat where it had always sat, weathered wood and creaking joints, facing west toward the hills. Beside it, close enough that their armrests nearly touched, stood the wheelchair, wicker, and wood and iron wheels. The same chair that had carried her onto the auction block 10 weeks ago. Both faced the same direction. Both watched the same sun set over the same land. Both belonged inside the house. A kerosene lamp burned low in the window, casting a warm glow through the flour sack curtains. On the table, a white cloth, clean, pressed, set with 2 plates and 2 cups, and a pie that Widow Hannigan had brought by that afternoon, her apology rendered in apples and cinnamon. Grace sat in her wheelchair by the window, watching the last light fade from the ski. Caleb sat beside her in the rocking chair he had moved from its solitary spot. His hand rested on hers. Their fingers intertwined. They did not speak. There was nothing that needed saying. Outside, the coyotes began their evening song, their voices rising and falling across the desert. The stars multiplied, scattered across the black sky like seeds thrown by a careless hand. The moon rose, full and golden, casting silver light across the land that belonged to them now, both of them, together. Grace turned her hand over, feeling the weight of the ring on her finger. The gold caught the lamplight, glowing warm against her skin. She had been sold for $50. She had found something worth more than all the money in the world. She had found home. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles after a story like this one. Not emptiness, something fuller. The way a room feels after someone has finally said what they have been carrying for years, heavy and tender at the same time. Many of us know what it is to feel unseen, to sit in a room full of people and wonder if anyone would notice if we simply disappeared. Some of us have loved someone who could not find the words to say it back. Some of us have been the ones searching for those words, failing, trying again. Perhaps you have carried something quietly for a long time. Perhaps you are still carrying it now. It is all right if this story did not answer anything. It is okay if the weight you brought with you is still there. Some things are not meant to be resolved, only witnessed, only held for a moment before we set them down again. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.